What's going on, everyone? Today is February 19th of 2023. My name is Derek, and welcome to this, the 48th edition of the Superstream. As always, we'll take a look at the last week or two in the world of news, media, and celebrities that we've lost. And we'll explore how this all happens by the numbers. So first up today, we're going to talk about the Super Bowl 57, where the Kansas City Chiefs upended the Philadelphia Eagles in a really exciting game that finished with a score of 38-35. And we're going to focus on that particular score, 38-35. This is actually a final score that I had discussed in previous videos about the Super Bowl. We're also going to take a look at the death of actor Cody Longo, who many of you probably never heard of. However, his death was a foreshadowing of sorts of another story we got a few days later with a school shooting at Michigan State that was on the 13th of February. We're going to look at how the death of Cody Longo is a presidential riddle, but what's most significant about this story is that Cody Longo was born in the city of Littleton, Colorado, which was, of course, the scene of really the first major massive school shooting to enter the public conscience, which was the Columbine High School shooting back in 1999. The Michigan State shooting occurred on the 44th day of the year. Michigan equals 44 in Gematria, MSU 440 as well. Also, the 13th of February, written 13/2 in most parts of the world, Michigan State Spartans, the name of the team mascot, also summing to 132. Something else that's been big in the news lately, and it took about a week or so for this to really pick up traction in the mainstream media, but we had a major train derailment on February 3rd of 23 that occurred in East Palestine, Ohio. And we're going to talk about this at length. The word train has gematria of 230 in the Latin cipher, which I consider to be the most significant. And it's certainly no coincidence, it seems, that this train derailed on the date 2/3/23. A big death in the world of sports this week, as longtime Fox announcer Tim McCarver, who also enjoyed a career in the major leagues, primarily for the St. Louis Cardinals, dying at the age of 81 on the 16th of February, or 16/2. And we'll talk a lot about how this connects to the Cardinals, which has gematria of both 81 and 162. Finally, we'll be looking at the big news story from a couple days ago, where singer Kelly Pickler's husband, Kyle Jacobs, a country music producer, allegedly committed suicide in the city of Nashville, Tennessee. And the suicide is very odd, as he had just celebrated a career milestone the day before. And we'll discuss how that all happened by the numbers, particularly as it connects to the first Great American Total Eclipse from 2017. You'll see this first eclipse in 2017 passed directly over the city of Nashville, Tennessee, which is where Jacobs is said to have died. His death was on February 17th, the date written 2/17, and of course this eclipse over Nashville occurred in the year 2017. So we'll talk at length about these eclipses, as we very frequently do. You know, these are very significant events occurring here in the United States, 2017 and 2024. Remember, during a total solar eclipse is the only time that the sun's corona is visible, and it was the exact halfway point between these two eclipses, December 14th of 2020, when the FDA first approved the coronavirus vaccine. If we have time, we'll talk about another post I made on Packers legend Reggie White and the 1996 burning of his church. But before we get there, we're going to talk about the big story out of the NFL this past weekend. Now, I haven't done a whole ton of work on the Super Bowl since, I think, the end of December. I was onto a big riddle with the Packers and Vikings, and for anyone who's doubting that that was true, go ahead and check out my video on Damar Hamlin. And that explains how the Packers and Vikings riddle all led towards a game on January 1st, which was completely coated with the numbers of Jesus. The day after that game, Damar Hamlin collapsed on the field, and of course, 3 days later, we learned that he would be okay. Damar Hamlin wearing number 3. So anyways, let's talk about how this year's Super Bowl was coded by the numbers. And this isn't going to be a full numeric breakdown of the game, but I really wanted to focus on this score. 38-35. Back in December, this past year, just 2022 right here, I made a post explaining how games that ended with the score of 38-35 seem to be connected to this season. Now, there was a big perfection riddle this year, and this had a lot to do with the death of Christine McVie of Fleetwood Mac. And I just want to quickly explain how this all ties in. On November 30th, which I consider to be this ultimate eclipse date, we lost Christine McVie, famous from her participation in the band Fleetwood Mac. Well, Christine McVie's real name was Christine Perfect. That was her birth name. She died 496 days before the eclipse that begins over the state of Texas. Notice how Texas has Gematria of 496. And 496 is one of just a handful of perfect numbers. A perfect number is defined by a number whose divisors sum to double of the number itself. So if you take all of the numbers that can be multiplied into 496 and add them together, you get a sum of 992, which is double of 496. This makes it a perfect number. And 496 is only the third perfect number. So we had this singer named Christine Perfect dying a perfect number of days before this eclipse. On top of that, the very next perfect number is 8,128. This is pretty rare, a perfect number. And this number, 8128, was found in the age of her husband, John McVie. Of course, ex-husband, I suppose. But John McVie was 28,128 days old. So you have the 28, which is the second perfect number, and the 8128, which is the fourth perfect number. So this was part of the reason that I was talking a lot about the Packers, as the Packers had to go perfect in order to make the Super Bowl from that point forward. And of course, that could have been one of the riddles that could have played out. But instead, we get this 38-35 score. Now, the last two teams to threaten a perfect season in the NFL were the Packers and Carolina. Notice how both Packers and Carolina share matching 73 gematria with the word perfect. And for those of you who may be new to the channel, we're looking at the language of gematria, a very simple, mystical practice that assigns a numeric value to each letter of the alphabet, 1 through 26, as the ordinal cipher highlights here. So in that method, perfect, Packers, and Carolina all equal 73. Well, the last perfect season to end was completed by the New England Patriots, and their 16th and final game of that season ended with a 38-35 victory over the New York Giants. 4 years later, the Green Bay Packers continued their perfect run, going 12-0 with a 38-35 win over the Giants. 4 years after that, the Carolina Panthers continued their perfect season with a 38-35 win at the New York Giants. And this is a trend I picked up on a while ago. And I noticed how it started to connect to this year's Super Bowl. If you go back to the first ever meeting between the Packers and Panthers, it was exactly 1,361 weeks before this year's Super Bowl. 1,361 is the Latin value of 57. And of course, this year's Super Bowl was Super Bowl 57. Now, the score of that meeting was also 30-13. And 1,361 weeks is also 313 months. And the Packers and Panthers were the team involved in this crowning ritual where Aaron Rodgers scored a touchdown and his teammates placed a crown over his head. And of course, there was this crown eclipse near Green Bay last year, or 2021. Now we have the crowning of a new king named Charles. And Charles is Aaron Rodgers' middle name. So, I'm not sure how quite to explain the pattern recognition that went into this, but what are the odds that I made a post about the final score of the Super Bowl long before the Super Bowl was even played? So while I didn't necessarily pick up on the winner, I did pick up on the scripting to some extent. And I do think it's interesting that the team that did play in the Super Bowl from the NFC this year was the Philadelphia Eagles, which is the only team to have matching 150 Gematria with Green Bay Packers. The winner of the Super Bowl, the Kansas City Chiefs, was the team that played the Green Bay Packers in the very first Super Bowl. And we're going to talk about how this year's Super Bowl was a massive birth riddle. This was highlighted by the performance of Rihanna during halftime of the Super Bowl. Before we get there, I quickly want to talk about the Gematria here, just in this simple alphabetic order. If you put in the two teams who played, Kansas City, Philadelphia, notice how you get an ordinal value of 223. This year's Super Bowl played in the year 2023 on the date leaving 322 days in the year, 322. If you write out Chiefs and Eagles on top of this, you get an ordinal value of 322. Now, the first thing with the numbers that really stood out to me in this game is that field goal kicker Harrison Butker for the Chiefs entered the game with a 20-23 field goal count for the playoffs in his career. And after he missed the field goal, he was 20 for 24, and there were 2 minutes and 24 seconds left in the first quarter when that happened. Of course, skull and crossbones equals 223. Skull and Crossbones headquartered at Yale University, which turns 322 years old this year. Now, the performer Rihanna for this year's halftime show, she's married to rapper A$AP Rocky. And notice how these two were born 32 weeks and 2 days apart, which I thought was pretty interesting. But let's talk more about this skull and bones connection. In the alphabetic order, skull and bones sums to 149. This is the same number as revelation in reverse. The phrase revelation equals 149. Super Bowl and regular season MVP Patrick Mahomes was 149 days after his birthday for this year's Super Bowl. In the standard alphabetic order, revelation sums to 121. Notice how this number is found in Patrick Mahomes' birth numerology. 9 plus 17 plus 95 yields 121. Well, next we're going to crack open this Latin Gematria cipher. Latin Gematria, which used to be called Jewish on my website. However, this method is based in the Latin alphabetic order, and it's also called Agrippa's key in ancient Masonic texts. In this method, revelation equals 1010. And on the date of the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes was 10,010 days old. And consider how the book of Revelation reveals the number of the beast as 666. This brings us to Sumerian Gematria, which is the standard alphabetic order times 6. You'll notice every number is the same as it is in ordinal, multiplied by 6. In this method, the name Pat Mahomes has Gematria of 666. When you reverse the Sumerian method, his first name, Patrick, also gives us 666. Now, another very significant method of Gematria is the standard mode, which is seen on the right side of your screen. Very similar to the Latin construction from the denary system, but using the modern 26-letter English alphabet. In this cipher, 666 sums to 2127. And in this game, Pat Mahomes was 21 for 27 passing. Remember, 666 days on a calendar is normally equivalent to 21 months and 27 days. And the calendar every bit as important to this study as the language itself. This was Super Bowl 57, and also remember 666 and 666s both yield 57 in the reduction method. Now, also back in December, I explained how this year's Super Bowl was a riddle connected to the Immaculate Conception of Mary, who gave the virgin birth to Jesus Christ. And this was very evident in this year's halftime show. Now, the most obvious element of this is that Rihanna showed up to the performance pregnant, which I certainly don't remember ever happening before. At first I thought maybe, hey, they probably told her to keep the weight on after her first child from May of last year, just so that she looked pregnant. But indeed, she is expecting her second child. You know, how amazing is that, considering we were explaining the birth ritual months ahead of time? In the language of Gematria, birth, Mary, both summing to 57. In the reduction method, or Pythagorean, as seen on the bottom part of your screen, this cipher uses the basic rules of numerology to drop every double-digit number to a single digit prior to adding it to the equation. Birth ritual, also 57. And then we learned that Rihanna was pregnant, which sums to 570 in the Sumerian cipher that we just went over. Of course, Super Bowl 57 played on a date with primary numerology of 57. Recall the player who caught the Immaculate Reception, Franco Harris. Franco equals 57. He died just 3 days before his number was set to be retired. The name Rihanna sums to 38. It just so happens that at halftime for the Super Bowl, the score was 24-14, meaning there were 38 points on the board. And of course, you know, the Super Bowl halftime show is what many people really tune in for. The Super Bowl, a spectacle that brings people from all walks of life to sports. And Rihanna expressed her love for Doritos during the halftime performance of this by throwing up the triangle. And of course, I kid, probably a little reference to the Illuminati. And let's just quick talk about these guys who shared the stage with Rihanna for this performance. And if you knew what I did going into this game with what we'd be seeing at halftime, and you didn't laugh while watching this, then I mean, to me, this was hilarious. It was very obviously a bunch of guys dressed up as sperm chasing Rihanna around the stage. And some people said that this was somehow connected to COVID, as these guys were wearing something that looked like hazmat suits, but that doesn't explain the endless humping that we saw. And again, it's all a ritual connected to birth, rebirth, and perhaps the return of the Messiah that some people believe will be happening during this transition of ages. And of course, that's what it could really be all about as we shift from the age of Pisces to Aquarius. So Rihanna is married to Rakim Myers, better known as ASAP Rocky. And I thought it was interesting that Rakim Myers equals 133 when he was 133 days after his birthday for the Super Bowl. The name ASAP Rocky also sums to 53. And this is another important number to what we saw play out for the halftime show. The word womb has gematria of 53, and Rihanna showed up with a new baby in her womb. The womb is symbolized with the Vesica Piscis, which happens to be the exact same shape as the football in the NFL. Vesica Piscis shares 53 gematria with solar eclipse. Football, a sport steeped in the symbolism of eclipses. Again, see my Damar Hamlin video for more on that. And I thought it was interesting that Rihanna is not only a world-famous musician, but is also an ambassador for Barbados. And notice how she became the ambassador exactly 53 months before the Super Bowl. Barbadian Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary. Notice how this phrase even sums to 535, which has the 53 forwards and backwards. Furthermore, notice the date that she took office, September 20th, which is written 20/9 in most parts of the world. Her full name, Robin Rihanna Fenty, sums to 209 in the standard alphabetic order. On top of that, the name Rihanna by itself sums to 209 in standard gematria. So again, I didn't want to go full ham on this decode, but just to show a little bit, and the fact that the final score was something that I was talking about before this game, and if you're thinking, what are the odds of this? Well, they're not very good. What we're looking at here is a list of every single game that ever ended with a score of 38-35. Now, of course, there's been many more of these as of recent. 15 of these have happened since the turn of the decade. But it's still pretty unlikely. We're talking about a 0.5% of a chance. Next up, I'm going to talk about the death of actor Cody Longo, who was not a very well-known member of Hollywood. And he's listed here as being an actor from Days of Our Lives. It turns out he had a pretty minor role in this show, and it was over 10 years ago when he played on the series. However, when reviewing the numerology of this story, you see that something very bizarre is going on here. And we're going to start with the number that's listed in the headline, number 34, which is the age that Cody Longo passed away. Notice how Cody Longo was born on March 4th, the date written 3/4 here in the United States, syncing up with 34. In Gematria, the name Cody Longo sums to 34 in the reverse reduction method. It's being reported that he died of alcohol poisoning. And notice how the word poison equals 34 in reduction. So does the word murder. 34, just like poison. Now, what we're also going to talk about is how this is actually connected to Joe Biden. Notice how the name Biden equals 34 in ordinal. Cody Longo was found dead on February 8th, Wednesday of last week. However, some outlets are reporting that he died on February 7th, which is very possible. He may have died the night of the 7th, found dead on the 8th. Wikipedia here telling us the 8th as well. But the reason February 7th stands out is because that was the date of Joe Biden's State of the Union address. Notice how the name Cody Longo in Gematria is what we call a supermatch with the word president. Cody Longo equals 110, 133, and 47. These are the same values as president. Cody Longo was from Littleton, Colorado, the site of the Columbine High School massacre. I point this out because Littleton, Colorado equals 210 in the alphabetic order. And although Cody passed away on the 7th or the 8th, it wasn't until February 10th that his death was reported in all mainstream outlets. The word sacrifice also giving us Gematria of 210. And again, Littleton, Colorado, scene of the Columbine shooting. The Columbine shooting fell in the year 1999 on a date with 34 numerology. 4 plus 2 plus 1 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9. Cody Longo dying at 34. So this is connected to Days of Our Lives, as this is the show that's quoted in the headline of the article. Back in August of last year, NBC announced that Days of Our Lives would be removed from the network and would begin streaming on Peacock. This news was published on August 4th, a date with primary numerology of 54. In the alphabetic order, Peacock equals 54. Measuring from the date of this news story to the date that we learned that Cody Longo died, February 10th, was a span of 191 days. Also in ordinal, Days of Our Lives sums to 191. The date of this report had numerology of 19 and 55. Notice how NBC sums to 19 and 55. The word sacrifice also 55. And you just have to wonder with all these deaths. You know, I certainly know of people, and I knew people who died from alcoholism, but it usually happens much later. And I'm not necessarily here to speculate on these deaths, but it's just strange to die so suddenly from alcoholism, I guess is the point I'm making. So let's talk more about Peacock, as this is the streaming service that Days of Our Lives was part of. Well, Peacock launched on July 15th of 2020, meaning that news of Longo's death fell 941 days later. 941 is the 160th prime number, and 160 is the ordinal value of Peacock Network. Furthermore, Cody was found dead 1 year and 60 days before the next total eclipse that passes over the United States. I also thought it was interesting that TMZ may be connected to this. Now, I've never thought to check the numerology of TMZ, which is the news outlet that reports these deaths for the most part. But consider how they're always at the front line of reporting, right? And check out the address that they use for their headquarters, 13031. Followers of my channel know that 1331 is my favorite number. This is a number that points to this eclipse sacrifice code. And check out how old TMZ was on the date that Cody Longo potentially died. Exactly 207 months or 6,300 days. TMZ equals 630 in Latin Gematria. Tabloid equals 63, so does Longo 63. In reduction, Longo and tabloid both equal 27. In fact, Longo equals 207 in standard Gematria, dying exactly 207 months after the founding of TMZ. Peacock also 27. Could it be that we've been missing a number of riddles that are actually connected to TMZ? I think it's very possible. Notice how TMZ was founded on November 8th of 2005. And both November 8th and the year 2005 have digits connected to the word death, which sums to 118 and 25. Believe it or not, there's a riddle connected to Adolf Hitler in this story. And the reason here is pretty simple. The Columbine High School massacre, which occurred in Littleton, Colorado, the hometown of Cody Longo, fell on the birthday of Adolf Hitler. April 20th, 1889 is the date that Hitler was born. This means that the Columbine school shooting occurred exactly 110 years after the birth of Adolf Hitler. 110 years. And the shooting and Hitler's birthday were both on the 110th day of the year. In the language of Gematria, the name Adolf Hitler sums to, you guessed it, 110. Notice how Adolf Hitler sums to 187 in reverse, matching Days of Our Lives. This also matches Columbine with capital letters. Peacock Network, 1087, the word death, 1807. The Columbine Massacre was also in the year 1999, which has an upside-down 666. When you reverse the standard method of Gematria, the name Hitler equals 666. But check this out. The name Hitler on its own sums to 72 in ordinal. This actor's name, Longo, equals 72 in reverse. 72 is also the reduction value of Columbine High. And in Latin Gematria, Littleton, Colorado sums to 702. The 72nd prime number is 359. This is the value of Columbine in the same Latin method. 359. Measuring from the death of Cody Longo to the total solar eclipse, actually a hybrid eclipse, that occurs on Hitler's birthday this year is 72 days. And the reason this year's eclipse syncs up with Hitler so significantly is because it occurs on Hitler's 134th birthday. 134, the ordinal sum of solar eclipse. Cody Longo's death also exactly 134 weeks after the launch of the Peacock Network. And remember, Cody Longo has this 110, just like Adolf Hitler, syncing up with president. But there's actually a lot more here. For the Columbine shooting, in Longo's hometown of Littleton, he was 133 months old. Cody Longo and president both summing to 133. When he died, Hitler would have been 133 years old. And remember how president equals 133. Consider how the word coronavirus equals 1303. Did you know that the two presidents presiding over the United States during the coronavirus pandemic were born 1,303 days apart from one another? Coronavirus was declared a national emergency in the United States on the 13th of March, the date written 1303. This was the anniversary of the Pope taking the Catholic Church over. So if we take this number, 133, the 133rd prime number is 751. Days of Our Lives was moved to the Peacock Network 751 days after it launched. And when we learned about the death of Cody Longo, it was 751 days into the term of Joe Biden. And notice how the name Joe Biden has the same digits, 715. There's more riddles here that connect him to Donald Trump. A lot of the same numbers here, but notice how Cody Longo was 12,010 days old when Joe Biden took office. The phrase blood sacrifice sums to 121. But more interesting is that this was also 46 weeks after his birthday. The word sacrifice sums to 46 on its own. Joe Biden, the 46th president of the United States. Cody Longo was found dead exactly 107 weeks after Biden took office. 107, the value of ritual sacrifice in reverse reduction. 107 is also the 28th prime number. And look how old Donald Trump was on the date that we found out about this death. Exactly 28,000 days old. So there's a lot to this one. Probably a lot more than you care to see for someone you most likely never heard of before. But this just goes to show you how tied in Gematria is to all these different elements that we see. Connecting to Columbine, Joe Biden, Adolf Hitler, the Peacock Network. It just goes on, doesn't it? I've often said that I don't know if I've ever really truly finished a decode. It seems like for everything that you discover, there's another 3 or 4 things that you're not seeing. And maybe that's just because it's not something you've been looking at, but it's what I actually really appreciate about Gematria is that so many different people can do it, yet all of their work can look completely different, yet equally relevant to one another. So we learned about that news on February 10th, and as I pointed out in my post, it was connected to a major school shooting. Well, then 3 days later, on February 13th, we get a school shooting at Michigan State University. Well, this says February 14th, but that's when the updates were posted. The shooting itself was on the 13th. And this was an interesting one because we're told there were a lot of warning signs and how this shooting may actually cause change. To me, it's a bunch of hot air, just constant division from the media talking about gun control. It's never really going to happen at the level that they probably really want, but it doesn't stop them from dividing us with this rhetoric. So this school shooting fell one day after the anniversary of Michigan State University, February 13th, whereas Michigan State was established on February 12th. This year, Michigan State turned 168 years old. Notice how MSU sums to 168 in reverse Sumerian. This means that Michigan State began its 169th year since being established. Well, the day before the shooting, on Michigan State's anniversary, the basketball team, improved to a record of 16-9 over the lowly Ohio State Buckeyes. The shooting itself occurred on the 13th of February, which is written 13/2 in most parts of the world. Michigan State Spartans sums to 132. This is also the 44th day of the year. The 44th day of the year, February 13th, is the starting date of Lupercalia, which is an ancient Roman festival celebrated by sacrifice. Notice how Lupercalia equals 44, The words shooting, gunfire, execution, and military, all 44. This college is in the state of Michigan, which equals 44. MSU also sums to 440. This shooting at MSU fell exactly 440 days after another school shooting in the state of Michigan. Back on November 30th of 2021, there was a school shooting at Oxford High School, just 60 miles east of Michigan State University. November 30th, I mentioned this date earlier in the stream, talking about Christine Perfect. In 2021, this is the same date that Merck released its new COVID pill. And notice how the date had numerology of 82, matching the gematria of both Oxford and COVID. 82, the number that's actually stamped on their pill right there. And of course, there were several students from Oxford High School who were attending Michigan State for this school shooting. And we're going to talk about how this school shooting has very heavy connections to the eclipse. Remember, this Oxford school shooting in Michigan, which is numerically connected, fell on this ultimate eclipse date. And I talked about this back in 2021, this 1331 code. In fact, for this Oxford school shooting, they gave us this quote, behavior in the classroom, which sums to 1331. And now we get a shooting at Berkey Hall at MSU. Berkey Hall, MSU, sums to 1331. 1331 is, or 13 times 31 is 403. See here, 13 times 31. Michigan State equals 403 in Latin. The next solar eclipse to occur belongs to Saros cycle 129, which is the ordinal value of Michigan State. So measuring from this eclipse, actually it's the April one I don't have up. All right, so the next solar eclipse falls on April 20th of this year, and it's a significant one because it's a hybrid eclipse. It will be a total eclipse in some parts of the world and an annular eclipse in other parts. This shooting fell 66 days before that eclipse from 129. Berkey equals 66. That's where the shooting started, Berkey Hall. Michigan State equals both 129 and 66. The shooting was also 1 year and 71 days after the last total solar eclipse, and Berkey Hall equals 171 in reverse. But what's probably a little easier to grasp is how this is connected to the two twin eclipses that I started this video off talking about. First of all, the name of this hall where the shooting took place, Berkey Hall. Notice how we get 99 in the alphabetic order. The first eclipse in 2017 was the first coast-to-coast eclipse in 99 years. The United States of America equals 99 in reduction. The nation got its name on September 9th, or 9/9. This second eclipse in 2024 falls on the 99th day of a leap year. The shooter in this story was named Anthony McRae, and the name Anthony McRae is a supermatch with total eclipse. 137, 187, and 56 with the S exception. The name McRae sums to 22. Again, this is the name of the gunman, Anthony McRae. The ancient Greek city of Sparta, which is where Michigan State gets its mascot's name, is situated on the 22nd meridian east, the number 22. 22 is the ordinal value of total solar eclipse. This shooting fell exactly 2002 days after the first eclipse. In Gematria, Spartans sums to 108 forwards and backwards. And this is a pretty significant connection. 108 is what we call a lunar number. In Gematria, both full moon and geometry sums to 108. The moon and sun are both 108 times their own diameter away from the Earth, and the sun is even approximately 108 Earths wide. The school shooting at Michigan State fell 1 year and 8 weeks exactly before the second Great American Eclipse. This measurement is also 1 year and 56 days with the end date. And the number 156 is a super significant eclipse number. In ancient Hebrew, eclipse equals 156. In English, eclipse the sun equals 156. Eclipses always occur 1, 5, or 6 lunar phases after the last one. In Latin gematria, Sandy Hook Elementary School equals 1560. And it just so happens that in this shooting here at Michigan State, there was a student who allegedly survived the Sandy Hook shooting. Her name was Jackie Matthews. And how often do we see this, right? Someone who survives one major shooting, also surviving another one. I think the name Mason Wells comes to mind, someone who survived 3 different terror attacks in 3 different countries. Now, it would make sense that students from Oxford High School were there, because that's only 60 miles east. But for someone from Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut to be attending the school at the same time, it's a lot more unlikely. But it turns out there's a strong connection here. The Sandy Hook shooting in 2012 also had numerology of 58, just like this year's shooting at Michigan State, also with numerology of 58. And the name of the student who was at both shootings was Jackie Matthews, whose name sums to 58. This year's shooting occurred in East Lansing, which equals 58. The phrase fake shooting intriguingly equals 58. The 58th triangular number is 1711. If you add every number, 1 through 58, you get a sum of 1711. Well, the city of Newtown, Connecticut, which is where the Sandy Hook shooting occurred, was incorporated in the year 1711. And the Sandy Hook shooting fell 1,711 days before the first Great American Twin Eclipse. And check out how the shooters of these stories are completely connected by the numbers. Anthony McRae, the shooter, here in 2023, was born exactly 4,700 days before Adam Lanza, who reportedly carried out the Sandy Hook shooting. The phrase total eclipse equals 47 and 137. Adam Lanza was born on a date with 47 and 137 numerology. The name Anthony McRae sums to 137 in ordinal. Anthony McRae's birth numerology sums to 114 and 33. Those are the same numbers we get when we type out Newtown. 114 and 33. The shooting began at Berkey Hall. Berkey equals 33, like the word eclipse. And look how old Anthony McRae was for the Sandy Hook shooting. 33 years, 187 days. Anthony McRae equals 187. The phrase total eclipse, also 187. Remember, the secret society that uses an eclipsed sun for its emblem, the Society of Jesus, equals 187. Also known as the homicide code. So if you include the end date, you find there's exactly 122 months between these 2 shootings, Sandy Hook and Michigan State. We're told that the Michigan State shooting began at 8:18 in Berkey Hall. Notice how both 8:18 and Berkey equals 122. The name Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, has a lot of overlap with MSU and Spartans. But notice how Adam Lanza equals 237 in primes. Michigan State Spartans also sums to 237 in ordinal. And Adam Lanza died 237 days after his birthday for the Sandy Hook shooting. There's some more interesting connections here. But, I don't know. We'll see if this live stream lasts. I'm not supposed to talk about the Sandy Hook shooting. In fact, my entire website was taken down once because I posted a picture showing one of the Sandy Hook victims also being the victim of another shooting in Pakistan, which is something that some of you may already know about, but if I show it here, I'm just going to get axed, you know? That's how it works. Speaking of taboo topics, I was browsing the local news today, and something interesting happened at my old high school. See if I can find this story. I should have thought of this beforehand. Basically, there was a basketball game at my old high school this past weekend on Friday night, and a student collapsed in the stands during the game, and they had to revive him, and they suspended the game and completed it the following morning. And I don't think I need to tell the people who watch my channel what probably happened. You know, it's completely ridiculous what's going on. What's so stupid about this story? Let me see if it's on the local channel. Student collapses at Arrowhead basketball game, AED used. And again, this wasn't even a player in the game. It was someone in the stands. And look at this. They're like, just like when NFL player Damar Hamlin went into cardiac arrest. So they're bringing comparisons up to Damar Hamlin. You know, Damar Hamlin got nailed in the chest at full speed during a football game, like a heavy contact injury. This was a kid just standing there, falling over. I mean, what do you guys think happened? Is it just... I guess we're all just born with heart conditions now, huh? Or is there something else that's going on? Tell your loved ones you love them. Because you never know when this is going to hit close to home. And it has hit close to home for me and people in my family as well, who did not heed my warnings, unfortunately. All right. Next up, I want to talk about the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this because there were a couple of families from East Palestine who participated in the filming of a movie with a plotline very similar to what happened there, where a train derailed and there were these dangerous chemicals. I'm not going to talk about that in this post. I mean, something like that could very well just be coincidental. Of course, I don't really believe in coincidences, but it seemed like there was something deeper under the surface, and indeed there was. So what I'm going to focus on here is how this connects to Israel. Now, again, this train derailment was in East Palestine, and Palestine used to be what everyone called the area near the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And Palestine seems to be phased out from Google Earth and Google Maps now. And we're all talking about the Holy Land, where Jerusalem sits. And this connection became very strong when not only did the train derail in East Palestine, but a couple days later, this video surfaced showing that the same train was on fire 20 miles before it crashed. And this video was taken in Salem, Ohio. And I thought, wow, Salem reminds me of Jerusalem. And then the train derailed in East Palestine. So the first thing I thought is that, does this train derailment connect to the numerology of Israel and its prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu? And absolutely it is. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi, is the prime minister of Israel, who is essentially the executive commander of the country. He's currently in his third term as prime minister. Now, his first term began back in 1996. You'll see it was the date June 18th. This train derailment occurred 230 days after June 18th. And his last entry into office, December 29th, was 230 days after Israel's anniversary. Israel established on May 14th. And notice how the word train sums to 230 in Latin Gematria. This train derailment fell on the date 2/3/23. And think about how this is like two 23s, right? 23, 23, similar to two 23s. And here we are in the year 2023. Well, 223 is a very significant number in Hebrew. This is the value of the moon in standard Hebrew Gematria. This year's train crash happened 223 lunations after a previous derailment that also plagued Norfolk Southern Railway, who was in charge of the train that derailed in Ohio this last week. Now, the number 223 is a prime number. 223, the 48th prime number. Notice how this year, February 3rd, had primary numerology of 48. 48 is also the year that Israel was founded. If you measure from May 14th to February 3rd, the date of the derailment, you get 266 days. East Palestine, Ohio sums to 266 in reverse. The Catholic Church currently ruled over by the 266th Pope. Israel's founding date of 14/5 is also reflective of the number 145. Norfolk Southern, the name of the railway involved here, is the 145th prime number in Latin Gematria. Real quick, I just checked the chat. Someone asking about the balloon over China. My last Superstream number 47, I did cover the numerology of the Chinese spy balloon, which was essentially an eclipse riddle connected to Xi Jinping, the president of China. So go back and check that out if you didn't see it already. There was definitely more with the balloon stories that I didn't cover, but that was the primary riddle. All right, so we've established that this is connected to the number 223 and 23. In Latin Gematria, the word Masonic also equals 223. And notice how the word Masonic has matching gematria with the word Jewish. Israel, the primary Jewish state in the world. Well, if you measure from Israel's establishment date, 5/14 of 1948, to the date of this derailment, we get exactly 74 years and 38 weeks. Both Masonic and Jewish have gematria of 74 and 38. Palestine, also 38 in gematria. And why is the number 38 so significant to train derailment? Well, in ordinal, the phrase train derailment sums to the 38th prime number, 163. Train derailment also equals 73. This is the same value as train in reverse. Train equals 73 and 37. And what stands out about this is that 73 is a star number. So is 37, also a star number. And what's Israel's flag? It's the same six-pointed star that these star numbers are derived from. So this graphic lays it out here. 37 to make this star, 73 to make this star. And if you look at Bibi Netanyahu, not only is he 73 years old, but this train derailment occurred during his 37th day back in office. In Gematria, the name Netanyahu equals 37, a star number. The president of Israel is named Isaac Herzog, and this derailment occurred 134 days after his birthday. Notice how the name Netanyahu equals 134. In Hebrew, Benjamin Netanyahu also equals 134. The substance that spilled for this derailment was called vinyl chloride. And notice how vinyl chloride sums to 75. There just so happens to be 75 weeks between the establishment date of Israel and the birth of Benjamin Netanyahu, exactly 75 weeks apart. This is also 17 months and 7 days. And in Gematria, Benjamin Netanyahu equals 177. This is also the value of the Jesuit order, 177. And look how old the Jesuit order was for this derailment. 176,177 days old. So you have the 177 and almost another 177, right? 176. Anyway, the Jesuits were founded in the year 1540. These are the same 4 digits in the standard value of Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu, 1504. Netanyahu's most recent term began on December 29th, or 1229. This is another Jesuit number. 1229 is the 201st prime number. The Jesuit order sums to 201. 2 of its founders sum to 201, the current Pope 201. Something else that always stood out to me in regards to this is that the phrase Saturn worship sums to 201. And so does worshiping Saturn. 201 reverse. Or this is actually just 1p here. Worshipping Saturn, 201. And there's strong ties between Israel and Saturn. Of course, Israel, the Jewish state, in ancient Hebrew culture, the god of gods was El, which represented Saturn. Of course, Saturn is the 6th planet from the sun, and on the poles of Saturn is a hexagon. Well, Israel uses the 6-pointed Star of David for its flag. Star of David has this 119 gematria, and with capital letters, Saturn sums to 119. So these are just some of the links between Saturn and Israel. It takes Saturn approximately 30 years to orbit the sun, and with the S exception, Saturn sums to 30. I actually want to dive into this a little bit because, to me, this is super interesting. So if you take the number of days in 30 years, check this out. So in 30 years, there's 10,957 days, okay? This is a prime number. And check out this prime relation. 1331. It's the 1331st prime number. Been talking about this one. This is my favorite number, 1331. Well, Saturn's orbital period is 10,759 days. So all you have to do is swap the 7 and the 9, and you get Saturn's orbital period. So the reason this connects here is because the train derailment was on the date leaving 331 days in the year. When you write out the number 331, it sums to 1331. Benjamin Netanyahu's second term as prime minister began on 3/31, March 31st of 2009. And when you measure from these two dates, his second term beginning to the train derailment, you get 13 years and 310 days. There's more that connects this to Saturn too. Again, my blog is always linked below down in the description if you want to dive a little deeper into these riddles. Next up, we're going to talk about the death of former baseball player and commentator Tim McCarver. Tim McCarver, a longtime announcer on Fox, commentated a lot of World Series alongside Joe Buck. And he was also a winner of the Ford C. Frick Award, a very prestigious award that's only given to one person every year, and it recognizes excellence in sports broadcasting. In this video, we're going to explain how it connects a little bit to this Ford Frick character, but also the baseball code, as I like to call it, which is a small series of numbers that connect significantly to the game of baseball, both on the field and in the language of Gematria. So we're going to start out with the Gematria of Tim McCarver in the Latin method. Using Latin Gematria, Tim McCarver sums to 1041. These are the same digits as the word baseball. Baseball equals 141 in this same method. Tim McCarver's playing career was spent mostly with the St. Louis Cardinals, where he spent over a decade with the team. The Cardinals are one of the most successful teams in baseball, and part of this, I believe, is because of their numeric connections. Notice how baseball equals 162 in reverse. There are 162 games of baseball in a regular season. Cardinals equals 162 in reverse. Tim McCarver died on the 16th of February, the date that could be written 16/2. McCarver was 81 years old when he died. And in the alphabetic order, Cardinals equals 81. McCarver was a winner of the Ford Frick Award in 2012, named after American sports writer and executive Ford Frick. And if you read up about Ford Frick, you find that he had a lot of issues with the Cardinals. This keeps coming up. The Cardinals didn't like Frick's support of the color barrier being broken, so they didn't like him for that reason. And in June of 1937, Cardinals players were very outspoken. So this kept coming up. Cardinals and Ford Frick. Well, notice how in Gematria, the name Ford Frick matches Cardinals in the two large methods, 248 and 288. Not only did Tim McCarver spend time with the Cardinals, but think about his announcing career alongside Joe Buck. Joe Buck is the son of famous sportscaster Jack Buck. And Jack Buck was the longtime announcer for the St. Louis Cardinals. Joe Buck was exactly 2,808 weeks old when Tim McCarver died. And 288 is the number that Ford Frick shares with Cardinals. Tim McCarver, dead on the 16th. Notice how this date had primary numerology of 61. In Gematria, St. Louis Cardinals sums to 61. 61 is the 18th prime number. And think about how many baseball players are on the field during a game. 18 active players at any given time. Baseball sums to 18 in reduction. When Tim McCarver was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame with the Ford Frick Award, that even happened on a date with 61 numerology. So he died on February 16th, or 2/16, as it's written here in the United States. This is another lunar number. The moon is 2,160 miles across. And look how many sidereal months old he was. A sidereal month is a lunar orbit, measuring the time it takes the moon to orbit the Earth in relation to the stars. So Tim McCarver, if you take his birthday, October 16th, 1941, notice he was 1,087 sidereal months old. 1,087 is the standard value of St. Louis Cardinals in Gematria. Remember the number 187 associated with death, as popularized by the California Penal Code. The word death equals 1807 in reverse. Tim McCarver died at the age of exactly 976 months. in satanic gematria, St. Louis Cardinals equals 796. And when Tim McCarver was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, he was 70 years, 9 months, and 6 days old. So McCarver died on the 16th, which also had numerology of 16. And check out how many lunar phases old he was. He was exactly 1006 lunations old when he died. These same 4 digits are found in his name. Tim McCarver equals 1060 with triangular numbers. What about the eclipse code? Tim McCarver died 2005 days after the first Great American Total Solar Eclipse. Remember, St. Louis is home to the Gateway Arch, which itself is an eclipse riddle. Check out my linked post in my blog that explains this. The name James Timothy McCarver equals 2005 in standard, dying 2005 days after the first eclipse. If you include the end date, this is 2006 days. And I thought this was interesting because the St. Louis Cardinals won the World Series in 2006. That was the first time that Tim McCarver and Joe Buck called a Cardinals World Series win. The Gateway Arch was constructed in accordance with the Arch eclipse that began in Canada in 2021. And check out what happens if you measure from that eclipse to his death. You get 616 days. That's the Latin value of ritual sacrifice. 616. Ritual sacrifice also gives us a 251. And his death also fell 251 days after the anniversary of that eclipse. Ritual sacrifice is also 154 in ordinal gematria, and measuring from the birthday of Tim McCarver to the birthday of Joe Buck, you get 10,054 days. One more story to cover for you guys today. This has to do with the death of country artist Kyle Jacobs, a songwriter and producer, who was famous for his work on several country albums, but maybe more so for the fact that he was married to Kellie Pickler. Kellie Pickler, one of the more famous contestants on American Idol, I think during its early years at least. Yeah, the 5th season of American Idol, which is when it still kind of mattered here in pop culture. Now, what we're going to focus on here is how this death is connected to a certain album. So we're told that he had a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And, you know, look, depression is common. There are a lot of people struggling with a lot of things, but how strange is it that this guy killed himself one day after posting this celebratory message about one of the albums that he worked on becoming platinum? In 2020, artist Lee Brice released Hey World, an album which Kyle Jacobs wrote several songs for. And this album went platinum just a couple days before Kyle Jacobs died. And he celebrated this fact and then killed himself. Is that not a little strange to you? And it should be. So first of all, let's start out with the fact that this happened in the year 2023 and how the number 223 has been all the rage this year. Jacob's wife, Kellie Pickler, her name sums to 223 in reverse. The name Jacobs also sums to 223 in reverse, here with capital letters used. Now, the number 223 is the 48th prime number, and Kyle Jacobs died on the 48th day of the year. February 17th is also the date that leaves 317 days in the year. And I point this out because the number 317, if you flip this word upside down, or flip this number upside down, it gives you the word lie. And in Gematria, the word lie flipped upside down remarkably sums to 317. Shout out to Zenith of the Alpha Americas for that find from years ago. It's really amazing, right? 317. The word lie flipped upside down. Notice how Kelly Pickler spells her name with L-I-E instead of L-Y. You have the word lie there. Now, I don't know what the truth about this story is, but to me, this is just a nod to this fact, right? Kyle Jacobs and Kelly Pickler got married on the very first day of the year 2011. This album, Hey World, was released on the 20th of November, which can be written 2011. In the standard alphabetic order, the phrase ritual human sacrifice sums to 211. In Latin ordinal, it even sums to 202. And this album was released in the year 2020, right? So 211 and 2020, both coded into the date of this album release. The album was called Hey World, which has gematria of 47, and the 47th prime number is 211. Hey World is a supermatch with the word platinum. And one day before he died, Kyle Jacobs celebrated this album going platinum. The word suicide also sums to 47. And it just so happens that when this album came out, Hey World, Kyle Jacobs was 47 years old at the time of its release. Kyle Jacobs' middle name is Christopher, which we commonly see like this, as the media loves killing the Christ figures. The name Christopher equals 59 in reverse reduction. So does his common name, Kyle Jacobs, 59. The album Hey World was by country artist Lee Brice, and notice how the name Lee Brice also equals 59. We'll check out how old Lee Brice was when Kyle Jacobs died. 15,959 days old, so you get the number 59 twice here. Jacobs died 59 weeks before the second Great American Eclipse. The word kill has Latin gematria of 59. 59, of course, the 17th prime number. Kill is also 17 in reduction. And not only did Kyle Jacobs die on the 17th day of the month, this was a date that also had numerology of 17. His wife's name, Kelly Dawn Pickler, essentially sums to 17 in ordinal, 170. With the 0 dropped, that becomes the number 17. The word sacrifice, also 170 in reverse. Now, something that stood out to me is that Lee Brice was born on June 10th of 1979. How strange is this, considering that June 10th, 1979 was the exact same date given to us for the birthday of the Michigan State shooter, Anthony McRae. They say he was born on June 10th, 1979, which is the same exact day as Lee Brice, who we get this big ritual sacrifice ritual connected to. For the death, when we learned about the death of Kyle Jacobs, his death was published the next day in the news. On February 18th, look how old Lee Brice was. 2,280 weeks exactly. In Sumerian gematria, the word death equals 228. The date of this article, February 18th or 218. The word death also equals 218 in standard. And with capital letters taken into account, the album Hey World sums to 218. All connecting to the date that we found out about this death, 218. So if you measure from the release of Hey World to Jacob's death, you get exactly 117 weeks. And this brings us to the next part of this riddle. The number 13 has gematria of 117. Not only did Jacobs die a span of 130 days before his birthday, but news of his death was also published 130 days before Kelly Pickler's birthday. And in the standard alphabetic order, the name Kyle Jacobs represents 13 with the 103. The number 13 is a prime number. See how it's the 6th prime number? Kyle Jacobs was born in Bloomington, Minnesota, and then died in Nashville, Tennessee. Bloomington equals 136. Nashville, Tennessee, when abbreviated, equals 136. Nashville, Tennessee also sums to 1,033. Kyle dead in Nashville. Kyle was born 13 years and 3 days before his wife, and when he died, he was 18,133 days old. And there's a huge Nashville riddle here. Notice how Nashville, Tennessee has matching gematria with both Kelly Dawn Pickler and Kyle Christopher Jacobs, 98 and 100. Nashville, Tennessee also gives us this 62 in reverse reduction. Kyle Jacobs, born in Bloomington, Minnesota, which is another 62 when abbreviated. He died on this 17th of February, which is a date with primary numerology of 62. Not only was his death 62 weeks after the last total eclipse, but it was also 62 days before this year's hybrid eclipse. The word sacrifice sums to 62 in reverse. Sacrifice also equals 206 in Latin gematria. The date he died also had numerology of 26. He died 2006 days after the Great American Eclipse that passed directly over the city of Nashville, Tennessee, back in 2017. 2006 days later. Kyle Jacobs was born in the year 73. Nashville, Tennessee equals 73. Home of country music. Country equals 73. Both sacrifice and ritual sacrifice equals 73. The phrase solar eclipse summing to 73. And why is this all connected to the eclipse code? Well, as I've been saying, the ultimate eclipse number is 1331. Never forget that. 1331, the ultimate occulted eclipse number. In gematria, the name Kyle Jacobs sums to 103 and 31, like 1331. In fact, the name Jacobs comes from Jacob, and the name Jacob also sums to 13 and 31. All right, everybody. That'll do it for this video. Thanks to everybody who jumped in, whether you're watching live or archives. I always appreciate the support, the love, everything you guys give. It's a big reason I do the work. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be dedicating a little bit more time to programming. There are some things that I really, really want to add to the website this year. And it's been a few months since I've really hammered down and done more improvements. So I'm going to start focusing on that. So don't be surprised if there's a little bit less work on the blog in the next week or so. Of course, every time I say that, it feels like we get a huge, huge news story. So it's not like I'm going to stop. If it's been a while since I've done my last video, feel free to check out the blog, as there's usually more posts than videos. But yeah, I think you guys will be excited about some of the things we'll be adding to the website. Focusing a little bit more on personal numerology, identifying significant dates before they come, and some other significant things that I think people will really enjoy. So I'll be starting work on that this coming week. And hopefully by the end of 2023, Gematrinator has some cool new tools and features that help make decoding this matrix that we live in a little more fun and maybe a little simpler as well. All right, everyone, that'll do it. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.